Hey everyone, welcome back to Sweet Yellow House. It's time for our Monday crafts, but before we get started, I just wanted to remind you to support your local community and shop local. So our project one is going to be this little wood planter stand or something. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's a little unique piece and it actually comes all together. So I'm going to take all this apart and I'm gonna wipe it down and just check it over to make sure that there's no like major damage on there. And I'm just wiping this down with a Clorox wipe. So once I get it all wiped down and checked out, I'm gonna grab some DIY Fancy Farm Girl in this really nice green color, and I am going to start to paint that. I'm just working out of the pot because there's only a little bit of paint left in here, and I'm not really worried about contaminating it because I know I'm going to use the rest of it on this project. So I do the first coat, let it dry, and then I go in for the second coat, and I just am working for pretty full coverage here. I just want to make sure I get rid of all that streakiness. So I put on the second coat and I let that dry. And once that dries, I am going to wet distress that with a damp paper towel. After I get that done, I'm going to gather up all of my odd and end random transfers that I have from IOD, and these are just transfers that are left over from other projects, and I'm going to start to place those on each of these little layers of this stand. Once I get those placed where I want, I'm going to grab the big top from DIY as well, and I'm going to do 2 layers on each of these pieces, making sure that they're nice and sealed in. I let that dry over a couple of days, and then what I'm going to do is just put this all back together. For project 2, I found this little vase. It looks like something somebody may have bought as a souvenir piece from a vacation. And I'm going to grab the IOD Heirloom Roses mold. And I'm going to start to make several castings or molds from this using my paper clay. I'm going to make sure that I dust those with some cornstarch first. This is the first time I'm using this mold, so I want to make sure that I have that guaranteed that it's going to pop out of there. Once I get those placed where I want, I'm going to start gluing those down with the Titebond. And I just move that around until it looks pleasing to me and it looks like it, you know, it has a nice design to it. I'm using a very generous amount of the Titebond glue. I want to make sure that it's really going to stick to this surface. Most of this little vase has a very like sandy, grainy texture, so I'm hoping that it'll stick to that very well. So once I get those all glued down, I let that dry, and then I'm going to come in with a second layer of flowers. I'm going to add another mold to this project, the IOD Ankatha scroll mold, and I'm going to use the little flowers and stuff that are in this mold, and I'm just going to sprinkle those amongst the other flowers that I've already put down. And of course I'm using my Titebond again, and I'm going to use some paper, painter's tape, just to hold those in place until they dry. I better start putting miles on my feet. I'm so tired. Once that is dry, I'm grabbing a syringe and I'm gonna fill that with some of the Titebond glue, and also put like a more like a needle point to that. It's not as skinny as like a needle that you would use. It has a little bit of a wider opening so that the glue can get there. get through there a little bit better. And then I'm going to use the tip of that and just fill in some of those crevices in between those molds. And then once I get that where I want it, I'm going to let that set up overnight. Now that's all set up and in place, I'm going to grab my letterpress gray DIY paint, and also I'm going to use some baking soda. But before I do that, I'm going to put some water there just to thin that paint out a little bit. And then what I want to do is grab a little sifter, and I'm going to sift that baking soda just because I don't want any major clumps in there. I want it thick, but I don't want it clumpy. That way nothing's going to really take away from the detail in the molds. I make sure that I get in between all of that, and then I'm going to let that first layer set up and dry, and I'm going to go in with the second layer and making sure that I'm putting this on fairly thick but in one direction, and that's going to build the texture on that. Once I have that texture where I want it, I'm going to let that set up and dry. Once that is dry, I'm grabbing my folk art home decor wax in clear, and I'm gonna do a layer of clear wax all over the vase. I'm making sure that I have all the crevices in between those molds and on top of there, and I'm making sure that I'm filling that in pretty well. Once I have that all together, I go in immediately after with the DIY wax, white wax, and I'm going to move that around over, and it glides on a little bit better because we put that clear coat on there. And I'm going in between these two waxes together. I'm using some of that clear wax just to thin some of the white wax out, and I'm just going over it and wiping it back. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to grab the dark DIY wax, and I'm just going to go in between those crevices just to kind of give it a little bit more dimension. Once I'm done with that, I let it dry, and this is what it looks like. Psychology in a different way to look at it all. Project 3 is this little, I'm not sure what it is. I don't think it's like a jewelry box. It looks like maybe like a little key caddy that you would hang your keys in somewhere. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually remove these doors, and that's going to make it easier to kind of get everything painted. Once I get the doors removed, I'm gonna remove also the little part that holds the keys. I just want to make sure that I get as much taken off as I can just to make it easier to paint. So I'm grabbing some DIY apothecary paint, and I'm gonna put that in a little pot and add some water to that. Mine was a little bit too thick for my liking, is why I just added the water, so that way I can just keep the surface a little bit smoother and not so chunky from the paint. I'm going to paint the whole inside of that cabinet with the apothecary, and all of the outside I'm going to do in the vintage linen white with the DIY paint. All in all, I do about 3 coats of the apothecary on the inside and the white on the outside, and I let that dry. Next, I grab my Prima Avery mold while that paint is setting up and drying, and I'm gonna make some molds with this. First I try with the paper clay, and I realized pretty quickly that because the molds on this are very fine and delicate, that paper clay is just really not going to cut it. So I decide to scrap that and go in a different direction. So I grab my resin, which is equal. It's a 2-part resin, which is equal parts of each, and you mix those together until they become kind of loose feeling. And I grabbed some of this gold mica powder, and I thought that I was going to go in this direction and make those molds gold, those castings gold. I was just kind of testing it out to see. So I'm using a syringe to get into those molds with this resin. Like I said before, this mold is has very delicate design, and so using the syringe just makes it so much easier to get into those little tiny areas. So once I got those all filled up, I'm gonna set that aside and let those cure overnight, and so that I can pop them out. So I come back the next day, those are all cured, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting all the things back together. So I went ahead and put some glue in and attached that key holding part back into the inside. And I'm going to grab the big top and go in and seal all of this. The doors are still not painted and standing by because I'm gonna do something with those in a minute, but I'm just making sure that I have all of the other part of that coated with the big top, and I'm gonna put that aside and let it dry. Now that my molds are cured, I'm going to pop those out and arrange them on my door in a design that I like. And once I get those situated, I'm going to grab the Titebond and glue those down with that. After I have those glued down, I set those aside so that they could dry overnight. But I'm so tired. So once those are dry, I grab my vintage linen again, and I'm gonna do a coat over the doors and the molds there. So, and I'm just covering everything up in a really nice coat. I think I do about 3 layers on this, and I let dry. While those are drying, I decided that I want to add some transfers to the inside of this cute little cabinet. And so I grabbed some of those. I believe those are iodmoulds, but I'm not exactly sure which packet they've come out of. And I just put those into place. I thought by now pain would be my friend. I go back over to the doors, which are now dry, and I grab some of the folk art white and clear wax, and I always have that mixed up in a container, and I use that, and I'm going over the doors and filling, just going over everything and giving everything a really nice coat. Once that's in place, I grab my other mixture, which is the white, clear, antiquing wax mixed together in this container. If you've seen my other videos, you know how I keep these and how I make those. I've showed other videos me doing that. And I'm just using that mixture to highlight those molds. And I'm putting it on and I'm wiping it off, wiping it back, and pretty aggressive. So I'm not leaving a whole bunch of that on. Once I get that where I want it, I'm actually going to grab the DIY dark wax, and I'm just going to start making my way around those molds, and then I'm feathering those edges out. Once that's in place and I like where that is at, I actually grab my gilding gold wax, which I didn't get this film for some odd reason, and I just use my finger and I rub over those molds that are in the front. Once I have that done, I grab my combination white clear and my white clear and antiquing wax, and I'm just going over the whole cabinet and wiping it back just to give it all a really good antique look, so that things don't look so bright and other parts don't. And then I'm gonna screw put the doors back on the front, and here's how that turned out. So I just wanted to say thank you again, and thanks for watching, and I appreciate you spending your time with me. And don't forget to submit your questions for What Do You Want to Know Wednesday, which is the last Wednesday of the month. I'll be doing a vlog where I answer all of those questions. So we will see you soon. At it all, 'cause my perspective is broken.